Hello, everyone. Any web novel readers, YouTube video trawlers, people interested in web novels, or first-time readers, and just visitors in general. This is going to be my first web novel summary on this channel, temporarily known as Adrifting, and possibly in the future, web novel analyst and reviewer, abbreviated to WAR. And hopefully, my first web novel analysis and subsequent analyses will follow shortly behind this video. However, looking at like how long this original audio was technically supposed to last, around 2 hours, that might take a little bit. So yeah, I really intend to make this a weekly thing. That's the goal. So yeah, when I do get that up and running, that's going to be quite cool. So when I first started reading the story, I knew I had something amazing on my hands. And the reason why I knew that is because the way that the author wrote the material, the topic he chose was just different than anything else. And I was just as excited when I started preparing this because I knew I would be able to share with everyone an amazing story. Now, before I get into the book, so with that tangent out of the way, let's talk about the story. Now, the story I've chosen to share with everyone is called Tomorrow Has Not Arrived, or Tomorrow Hasn't Arrived, which is abbreviated to THA, as most web novels are. And that's my personal translation on the novel. The best machine translation that I've come across is Tomorrow Is Not Here. TISH is what it's abbreviated to. Tish, which is easier to say, but I prefer my own translation. Now, really briefly, the other machine translations could also be translated as Tomorrow Is Not Coming, Tomorrow Is Not Close, or Nearby. And all these translations come from the 4 original Chinese characters, the original title, which is Ming Wei Ling, right? And just to give a quick breakdown of that title, because I am going to do a quick analysis of that. The first Chinese character is Ming, right? And Ming generally means smart or tomorrow. And to understand what it means, the meaning of it, we have to really look at the next character, real quickly. Yeah, Ming, I think is the first accent. Is the 4th accent in Chinese, I think. Just guess. Really quickly, though. Generally means sun or pertaining to sun. It can also pertain to calendars, a calendar day, or just a day in general, or a date, right? But how we know is that when used in conjunction with Ming, Ming'er means tomorrow. And then we have the other 2 terms, Wei. Wei by itself generally means future, like 未来. That's generally how it's used. But a grammatical term, it generally means has not or hasn't. And in this context, hasn't really applies to the following term, or haven't, I guess, as well. Ling, that's the following term is Ling, and Ling generally means coming on its own. It's commonly seen in the phrase 欢迎光临, which is a welcoming greeting that's used in Chinese. This phrase is used in Chinese stores, shops, restaurants, and businesses. It's really a common greeting used for customers. When they step in the door, you'll often hear 欢迎光临. That's how they welcome customers. And so this title, Ming Wei Ling, translates to Tomorrow Has Not Arrived. And so now we're going to start getting into the background information. It's more timestamps and just future stuff. The book has around 5 volumes and an epilogue, which totals to around 1.8 million Chinese characters. I rounded up, of course. It's not as intimidating as it is. I'll give you some context in a little bit, but a little more background information. I like to say it's around 1.78. That's just the way I read it. But on the site, it's actually 1.718 million Chinese characters. So it's closer to 1.7, but I always often leave out the 1 and just say 1.78. And just some context on that number 1.8. It sounds intimidating, but really, this is not even like some of the longer ones. Generally, you'll see a lot of novels being 2 million characters and up. That's like an actual search category on the site. There are books, there's search terms for between, like, I think 100,000 or half a million to a million, and then the next level up would be 2 million, right? So 2 million, this is below that number, below the threshold of 2 million. So above 2 million, they're not rare, but they're not like super common either. They're not like dime a dozen. So there are quite a few books above this length, and this is considered a decently sized book, but definitely not out of the norm and not super long. So it is definitely readable, and I'll get more into the context about length later. But for now, just some references that would be similar to would be the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling. Now, that book has 7, I think maybe even 8, which is like the Hidden or Destiny's Child to play, but it definitely feels much shorter, and because Harry Potter's is 7 and this is 5, and it's probably much shorter than Harry Potter, but I just wanted to give everyone just some sort of reference. And another series that you might compare it to would be, in terms of length, would be The Song of Ice and Fire, also popularized by Game of Thrones, by George R.R. Martin. Now, just a quick side note. At first, I wasn't sure that was the title and series of the books. I've just heard it in passing, both George R.R. Martin, Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, and whatnot. So I went back to do research, and I was pleased to find that I was correct. Now, here's where it's a little controversial, but to be honest, I'm just going to lay this out there. I haven't read either series. I'm a web novel person through and through, so although I've had an interest in fantasy, I've gone through some anime and manga, in terms of all these, I haven't really engaged with the community, or really went that deep. And that's why I decided to keep my niche, or at least for now, start with web novels before I even go into those topics. So yeah, I might get burned by the book reading community, but if that's what it is, so be it. Now, personally, my personal opinion is the length of the story is closer to the length of one book in particular, the length of Crime and Punishment. Now, it's not that much of a slog, but around that 300, I think, to 500 page range, that's about what it is. And you can even compare the way it's published to the way Crime and Punishment was published, which is chapter by chapter. Very similar way of reading and how to read it. Now I'm going to start a little tangent, actually after this. So it's hosted on Qidian, like most good novels. And here's where the tangent starts. The story, the author's timestamp as well. So back to the story. The author started writing this around 2019. I guess I'd gander around early 2019, although it could be like the fall of 2019. And he finished quite recently at time of writing, which is the 1st of July of 2020. Now, just future proving, and so people can have some context, this is really during the pandemic season. The pandemic, I think, starts around September or October in China and Asia. And then it isn't until around early 2020 that it really starts to spread towards Western countries. Now, the rub is, I don't know whether he chose to write it during the pandemic, or if he planned to write it during the pandemic, or if he just started writing and then it just happened to be a good time. But for whatever the reason, I felt like he chose a really good time to write it, because one of the things is the topics he captures a lot of cultural influences and important events and problems at this current moment in time, and just during this decade as well, or that decade. He does. I don't think, in my personal opinion, in analysis, I don't think he goes into the pandemic, but he does draw upon current cultural events, problems, and cultural figures, and he combines all this to turn it into an amazing story. He even goes into some anime and references as well, and which I think is quite cool. I think it was a great move on his part, just because it's one of the best times for people to read his work and for him to write it. As I said, I don't know if he planned it, but or intention, or it would just happen to be. But my personal opinion is just right place, right time. Not necessarily good fortune. I don't like to call it good luck, but just good timing. And so, just more on the book altogether as a whole. I mentioned before, I get into the context of it, and here's of the length. Altogether, the book and the story comes out to 768 chapters, including author testimonials. Now, 768, what does that mean? Well, in context, right, at the very low level, the short web novels will go from between 500 to 100 chapters. Now, this would be like a novella size, like a chapter level book, like one of the first chapter books a kid might read, of web novels at least. These are your love stories. A lot of first time writers, like this would be like children's authors and whatnot, but love stories and first time writers write at this level. Their quality is still quite good. I find short novels are always good novels, because even though they're short, they're quality, right? These are first time writers, love stories, and dramas. Then you have the next level up, which is Korean level novels. I like to call it Korean, but we'll just call it 300 mark or threshold. Now, a lot of 300 chapter novels, I call them Korean level novels, is because that's at the length at which a lot of the Korean translations have been at. Although possibly Arena, Seoul Station Necromancer, which is very similar to Apocalypse Cockroach. I'm pretty sure Apocalypse Cockroach is Chinese, and Seoul Station Necromancer is Korean. A lot of those Korean novels and translations have been around 300. I've read one at 150 and 300. They might even go to like 400, 500, but at the moment, most of them stay around 300. They do get longer. A lot of these novels, because they're short, they generally are quality, right? There are some without that, but a lot of the Korean translations turn out to be quality. I may get into more of the genre and whatnot later, but as I said, separate video, not at the moment. Now we get to some of the major thresholds of 500. I'm really going to skip around to 800 actually, because a lot of experienced web novel readers have a standard of how long they want the length of their book to be. Because if someone's starting to write it and they only have 50 chapters, it's really frustrating to have to wait week by week or even day by day if people are publishing daily. So like 100, under 100 is some people's threshold, especially for some first-time readers and even English readers, like just pure English readers. Some and a lot of the Western web novels, especially on Royal Road Legends, only reach up to like 200. I say only 200 is an impressive number, but in comparison to the length of Chinese web novels, they go much further, more depth. Now, some experienced Chinese web novel readers, or even web novel readers in general, will start to reach 500, 800, 1,000, 2,000. But my threshold recently is around 800 to 1,000, and so that's what I'm comparing it based on. But yeah, shorter than 800, they won't read anything shorter than 800. Above 800, you start to get to what I like to categorize wuxia or wuxia novels. These are the martial arts novels, Eastern fantasy, cultivation, and even some fanfics reach this level because you get to a certain point. I go actually I'll do that in a little bit. But yeah, around that threshold, it'd be like 500, 800, 1,000. That's around this level, and that's the length. And this story is obviously shorter than that. If I didn't mention before, this is a short tangent as well. So yeah, I've seen books that go another threshold would be that 2,000 chapter mark. If you could hit 2,000, that's a special mark as well. I think I've possibly read one or two 22,000 chapter books. I don't know if I finished it though. I know I've read ones that have gone that long, but I don't know if I could get that far. I've definitely read a couple, and even read to the point. I think 1351, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s. I've read a couple of those, a handful, of course, but I've read a couple. I'm not going to mention it here, but maybe in the future I'll go into some of those. So yeah, I'm trying to think off the top of the head if I missed anything. So, in comparison, back to the point, 1.8 million, that 1.78 million of this book is really nothing to scoff at, right? It's still decently sized. But as I said before, 2 million is quite common, and then this is not like super long. It's definitely not a book that you might want to first read. There's a reason why I did this. I did a debut summary on this one, but I think it's a good intermediary level novel, especially if you're maybe not the first one to get into. It could be a good one to get into if you're starting to read the machine translations or just trying to read raw ones. But this it is quite long, but still great though. It's not as long as some of the longer ones. 800 chapters, right? So yeah, that really concludes this short tangent, and now I'm going to get into the author of the story. Now, the author of this story is written by the Chinese name is Reng Qiuming. Now, getting into the English translation, my Chinese proficiency is not the best. Okay, so I use a lot of machine translations like Baidu, Bing. Sorry, I think I forgot to mention Yahoo and Flickr. I don't know why that comes to mind. But yeah, so Bing, Google Translate, Baidu Fanyi. Those are the machine translations I use. Because my Chinese proficiency is not the highest, so I'm really guessing on most of these. So if I do get something wrong in terms of Chinese translation, put in the comments. I'd love to read that because kind of want to improve Chinese proficiency. Full name, his pen name at least, Reng. I guess by the character on the left, which is called a Dan Reng Pao. Two strokes generally has to do with people, descended from the Chinese character Reng. Now, what that means, what that means is it has something to do with people or persons. And my guess would be it means to recognize, like to recognize someone. I couldn't find any information that confirmed it, but that's what I guessed. Chill is something I'm a little more familiar with. It's autumn or fall. I can say quite I can I can find evidence, and I could say quite confidently chill means autumn or fall, that season of the year. Now Ming is a little bit more difficult. When I put it into the machine, I didn't get anything out. It's just one of those names that just like don't necessarily mean anything, like John. Um, by themselves, they don't really mean anything. But in terms of context, what the machine translation gave out, especially I think this is from Baidu, I got the translation autumn drizzle. Now, yeah, if anyone could come with a better translation, that'd be great. But for now, I'm just going to go with autumn drizzle. Now, if you're interested in this work, you might want to check out some of his previous works. And he wrote works like, and the English translated titles, machine translated, of course. But I can kind of confirm is This Assassin Has a Problem and Magic Punk. Now, originally I wanted to not learn the Chinese name and pronunciations because that would take a while. Which was my original guess would be 这杀手有个问题 and 魔术少年, right? And then I wasn't even gonna guess on the last work that he did. But looking at the titles, they're actually not that difficult to read, which is This Assassin Has a Problem. The original title is 这个刺客有毛病. And then Magic Punk, the original title is 魔术朋克. Now, I don't want to really break it down too in depth, but I'll just do it really briefly. 这个 means this, 这 is this, and then 个 is generally a measure word or is. 死客 has to do with assassin. 死 kind of sounds like kill or die. And then 客 I think is thing, but 死客 is just a conjunction word that sticks together. This means assassin. 有 means to have, and then 毛病 generally means sick. Most people say 毛病 in the context of mentally sick, translated to problem, of course. Because 病, that term generally has to do with sick in general, and then 毛 means something's wrong. 毛病 together generally means mentally sick, but problem fits quite well. Now, Magic Punk, 魔术朋克, right? 魔术, those two are conjunction terms. 魔 generally has to do with mysticism, right? Some sort of that fantasy. And then 术, I guess those are conjunction to mean magic. Now, 术, that word is interesting because by itself, it is a homophone for 法, which is like law, 法律, 法学, that type of stuff. And then 朋克, it's an interesting term because 朋, the two moons generally mean friend or 朋友. So that's 朋. And then 克 is a homophone or just an onomatopoeia or just one of those audio sounding words that just sound similar. 克, right? Like you can hear it in 夹克, or which is jack or jacket. Which is Jacque, however you pronounce that French word. But 魔术朋克 translates to magic punk, and strangely enough, it reminded me of the anime Desert Punk. And he's currently working on a title called Sky Shroud Invasion. I wasn't even going to give my best guess at this because, yeah, I'm not getting that. But the translation is 天围入侵. I'm not analyzing that. I don't understand the terms, too difficult. But yeah, that's his current work. And yeah, if you really like the story, go check out some of his previous works. Those might be some ideas that you might want to look into. And yeah, that concludes the author. And now I'm going into the summary. Personally, I do a hybrid translation between the machine translation and some of my personal grammatical English edits. I mostly just do light touches though. Most of this, I really want to keep it in the author's words. But with translation, sometimes, you do it for ease of clarity. So now here's the translation. In the year 2130, in the future, of course, 100 years from now, 120 years from now, at date of writing, the sun has gone out and the earth freezes over. Lu Yuan, one of the last survivors of that frozen era, returns to the year 2125. He has 5 years to change the future, relying on the auxiliary light brain. For some context, I'm going to interrupt with some of these. Auxiliary light brain you can come to as one of those microchips. It's like in AI that generally you help, or in web novels, a protagonist would attach to his brain for computing power, just to do calculations. That has accompanied him back to the past. And Lu Yan's decision to save the world is he decides to use video games. games. Experienced web novels will know where this is going. The name of that video game is Tomorrow Hasn't Arrived, right? So that's the name. And the setting and the plot of the game is that it's set during the time after the sun has gone out. It's a post-apocalyptic game containing a lot of the tech that. So here, the author included a lot of tech that he may or may not write about. The technology he includes is nuclear fusion technology, artificial intelligent robots. That's literal translation. I put it as artificial intelligence and robots, moon bases, Martian cities, and everything that has not been completed in reality. The machine translation says will first complete their technical preview in the game. I translate it as will appear in the video game. But yeah, so the main point is the main character or protagonist inserts all these technologies in the video game. And what that does is scientists, students, skilled workers, singers, and even all people who have hope for the future choose to enter this game one after another because of all the technology inside and just due to the high quality of the video game. I'll get into how he does that later in the analysis. And the author's words is just like navigators running to the sea without regret. Pretty cool. And the last sentence the author writes on the summary is, Lu Yuan, the main character and protagonist, says, I put the future of mankind in this game. So I might have, I don't think I slipped up, but in the future I might do slip up in both the analysis and whatnot, and say that the main character, MC, or the protagonist is Lu Yan instead of Lu Yuan. And the reason why that's important is because Lu Yuan actually has an important meaning. The name always has important meaning. I'm never good at it, but this one I can recognize really easily. I would say Lu Yan because that's how I read it. But Lu Yuan has special significance. So when I do the summary, I really want to make sure I get that correct. But just a future note, I might read that. I'm also just going to do a clean reading of the translation, maybe even a raw reading of the translation without my commentary, just so, if someone wants to read that, that'd be cool. I'll put that on BTS. So now, that's a complete summary. And like most stories, after a summary, there's always a couple tags. I like to give it a couple of my own tags, just so people have an idea of what this category is under. So this is a real quick timestamp of a couple tags. A couple tags I've assigned this is a semi-apocalypse novel. I'll explain why I call it semi. There are some elements of VR gaming, some intrigue, definitely intrigue involved. A Qidian search engine tag, I originally thought it would be classified under fantasy, Gaowu, or a high-tech, or a parallel world. Obviously, it's science fiction, but now doing some research, it's definitely science fiction set in a future world, the year 2130. But yeah, that's the search engine tag. The way that the author writes the character is that the MC, the main character, is a normal protagonist. Now why I say the author writes it, or at least I feel like his intentions as a normal protagonist, he's not placed in the category of genius. He's not like a super smart protagonist. He's not an OP protagonist like some of the Korean and Japanese protagonists. And he's not a moron. He's not what TV tropes and overly sarcastic productions might call a crouching tiger, hidden badass. No, he's not one of those. The way the author writes it is he's a normal protagonist with, some long experience and, experience from the future, of course, and but normal nonetheless. He's not a genius. And he gets around that by using a tech assistant. Really, he's a normal protagonist, but he's written in the Chinese elves trope. I'll explain most of that in chapter 1 of in analysis of chapter 1. But he gets around all that with a tech assistant, which is in the summary called an auxiliary light brain. And the auxiliary light brain, or the microchip controller, or whatever one might call that tech assistant, think of it like Jarvis from Iron Man. It's just a helpful AI, and it's really a tool to help assist the protagonist. And for some experienced web novel readers, this is not a system novel. The auxiliary light brain doesn't assign tasks. It's just a tool, a very useful tool with some high tech, but a tool nonetheless to help assist the protagonist in doing stuff. So yeah, and just one last couple tags is it's a love interest. There's some love interest involved, some romance and drama. That's really the last tag. Just like any good Chinese web novel or just novels in general, there's always some drama and romance, and that just adds another facet to a really good book. And so those are the tags. But I feel like it's really important to mention what this book is not, because that's how you get a sense of what it isn't. Now, this book is not a harem, right? This is not where the Chinese protagonist gets 3 girls. No. It's not that story. There's a couple, Chinese web novels, Japanese web novels. They have that, which really goes to show, the bar. But it's not that type of story, which I think says volumes about it. From what I read, I couldn't find any sense of. I felt it was absent of racism. Um, yeah, I think so. One particular moment that really caught my eye was that there was a really intelligent and smart black character. They praised a black character, and that's special. It really goes to show the bar as well. But it's interesting to see an author praise an intelligent black character. Plays a very minor role, but the fact that it mentions that is particularly special. The reason why is, some Asian and Chinese culture is that people are xenophobic. They've been afraid of black people. The excuse, obviously it's still an excuse, but the reasoning and the excuse that's been given is, like with most cultures and countries, I don't think every country has gotten rid of racism entirely. Nordic countries are quite, xenophobic. China's quite xenophobic. Asian countries are quite xenophobic. You've got Japan. UK at times can be. America's definitely not got rid of its own. Germany and one group of people I don't want to advertise, the French, Italians, are xenophobic and racist, against African people and like Turkish, Islamic, Middle East, and Egypt and Turkey have their own sets of problems as well. But Chinese, Asian, and Chinese people have been historically afraid of black people, or at least that's the culture. And the excuse is, their technology has advanced, but their culture has not. And here I'm going on a little tangent here, but the idea goes that part of the things that reinforce cultural norms is technology, right? When you only have half the workforce in the workplace back in the 50s and 60s, and even previously, right? It was a very male, men-dominated workplace. Not a lot of genders in the workplace. And so when you really free up the workplace, not just for genders, but for race as well, like when black people entered the economy, when German, Irish, Eastern Romanian, Eastern European peoples entered the economy, Latvian, Mexican, South American, Spanish people entered the economy, you really start to get a boost in production. And when you open that workforce up to all genders as well, I was about to say both, but I feel like in this politically, just not the right term in the moment. When you open the workforce to all genders, right? What it does is it allows cultural norms to change, right? Because when productivity increases when people are treated equally, right? Like you can't just have men being treated specially, or even just race being treated specially, because that just doesn't increase productivity. It doesn't motivate people. So cultural norms change with technology, and the excuse and the reasoning behind China's cultural norms not being up to date or just being as sensitive as the modern world, or not even modern, just the Western world, is because their technology is quite advanced, but their culture has to take the time to advance as well. But historically, you can see some of that. See a male, I think a male author, and so it's not going to be a feminist novel, unfortunately, but it's not super male antagonist is like the center of the story. No, it's not that story either. As I said, it's not a harem, so it's probably not going in that direction. And so because it's not that type of story, you see that a lot of the female characters get a sense of agency. They're independent, which is special, especially in a lot of web novels and Chinese web novels in general. As I said, it goes to show the culture, but it's getting there. A lot of these female characters, they don't depend on the MC. They revolve around it because you have a male MC, male protagonist. And I was surprised in a similar way, but in an opposite way than when I watched Indiana Jones for the first time recently. I knew the story, but I'd never watched it. And I was surprised at some of the cultural norms displayed in that movie. And it's just the complete opposite of that. Or you could even watch OSP, Overly Sarcastic Production, the video creator Red's take on Don Quixote. I'll probably save that for the analysis because that is kind of relevant. But yeah, female agency is a thing in this novel. And one last thing this isn't is I felt like this wasn't nationalistic. Again, Chinese people can be nationalistic, just like most, any American, German, British, or Russian person. Nationalism is just a thing. It's one of the things that come with patriotism. And the reason why I say that is because the American characters in this story aren't purely evil. Foreigners are not evil. The British people are not evil. I don't think there's any British, but it's just American, which is cool because they focus on America. But no one is purely evil. And there are even some decent American characters that aren't evil, because foreigners can be some of the protagonists in Chinese novels and just stories in general. There are generally two types of Chinese villains. Accented Cinemas also did a story on this, video on this. There are foreigners, the British historically, sometimes French, but French haven't really done much in China, Indochina, yeah, but not China. The British and more recently the Americans, just antagonism and cultural conflict. But off the top of my head, the other villain would be Hanjie. It was what it would be known as. Chinese traders, traders of the same kind, or even just race traders. It's kind of like how Americans see Benedict Arnold, right? Really big trader to the country. So yeah, there are some American characters. There may be American characters and entities that are the main antagonists, but they aren't evil, right? It's they're antagonists in the way in the sense that they get in the way of the protagonist, the main character, right? And even then, he justifies it with good reason because he writes villains in the way that they all have their own agendas. This is a story where everyone has different agendas, and that's what causes conflict, not because people are evil and they don't like each other, or even racism. Although sometimes if there is, I didn't pick up on it. It's one of the first novels to feature, and I'd say an heroic American, but I think there's more than one, with even one or two supporting American characters, and that's surprising because you just don't see that. Like, I don't think there's a lot of American, even like American web fictions where well, actually you might, where you see like a Chinese secondary character. Asian, of course, Indian maybe, but I don't think I've seen that. Especially Asians and Chinese Asians and American and Western web fictions have not been portrayed in the kindest of lights, right? I think Accented Cinemas did another one on the Chinese female villain, which is cool, but maybe not the nicest light. And the way he writes it is he praises other countries, he praises America, and in doing so, he praises his own country as well, which some people might argue nationalism, and I definitely debate on that. I definitely debate you on that. But yeah, I think it's closer to patriotism, or categorized as patriotic spirit, because he doesn't make other countries look bad. He more just praises them, and in a similar sense praises his own country. Whether that's his intentions or not, I don't know, and I don't think it is, but one could argue. And then so back to some of the other tags. As I said before, there's some drama, but this is a weird apocalypse novel, and I'll elaborate more just like very very quickly. It's a future world. It's set in the year 2130, and it's a science fiction novel, as I mentioned before. But the reason why I hesitate to call it an apocalypse novel, I call it semi-apocalypse. That's a term. It's because that type of novel, the Frozen era stuff, is really set in the background. That's more like world lore, world building, and it's put on the back burner with various descriptions in the video game and story. But they don't really elaborate that too much until really later on, and even then, it's only in bits and pieces. I'll even elaborate more on the overall drama aspect later on a different video, but because of the spoilers, it might make it into a different video. Very extremely minor, though. I think it's okay to be put in a summary video. And just some of the things, just one last thing this is not, and a couple, it also includes a couple of recommendations and comparisons. This is not an HFY novel, and this is not under an HFY tag, which HFY stands for, if you don't know what HFY stands for, because it is in web novel circles, and I think even in Reddit, HFY stands for Humans Fuck Yeah, right? This is one where they praise humanity, very humanity-centric, human rights, space civilizations, and, galactic civilizations in spacefaring novels. But in that sense, it's very similar to, it's got vibes similar to Human Altered. I haven't finished the book. I've only read to around, I think, chapter 67 or 70, but, that's decently far, and I think I've read enough chapters to get a sense of the book. And the other two that it could be possible, or ones that you might want to read, would be They Are Small, and there was another novel, I don't know the name of it, but I think it was Human Meat or Human Burgers Do Not Consume. Or maybe it was just Humans Don't Consume, right? Quick disclaimer, I'm going to be honest here. Never read never read the last two on Royal Road Legends, now known as Royal Road. They're small Inhuman Burger, so they might not be HFY, but they, reading the summaries, they have maybe some similarities. Now some comparisons. It's very similar to protagonists and MCs and main characters to an amazing writer called Who Cares. It's a funny author name, and he wrote a very cool novel called Rewrite. Amazing novel. You can see it on Scribble Hub. I think he's published first on Royal Road Legends. Very, very similar MC, but different direction. And one story I always like to recommend is Omniscient Reader, one that I'm potentially wanted to do a debut on. But Omniscient Reader is by this author its author has two Korean characters I don't recognize, but the machine translation is Sinchon, and that's I think the given thing. I apologize if I didn't read the name correctly. I don't understand Korean. So yeah, two more things, but this is more of a major note. One last note, one of the two last notes is that this hasn't been logged into the database of novel updates, and because it hasn't been translated. So if there are any translators who want to pick this up, I highly encourage you to do so. Right? It's so amazing that I really wanted to cover this novel as my debut summary and analysis. Instead, because there are definitely other giants I could have covered, like The Great Storyteller on Web Novel, any of the Coach novels by Ling Hai-Ting Tao. The Winner's King is a great one, which is abbreviated to TWIK, or The Godfather of Champions, which I think is an abbreviation of GOC, but I don't think anyone uses that. Blue Butterfly's King's Avatar, which TKA, I think a lot of people have seen the anime, it's pretty famous, and more. But I wanted to focus on one that I would be proud in, and I thought this would be great to debut. And the last thing I want to mention is it's another return to the past. It's a do-over novel, as one might call it. But it's, you know how most do-over novels, if you've read some web novels, have a lot of business aspects involved, tycoon aspects involved. But it really tones down less of that, and it's got more of the drama aspects to it. And so that really concludes most of my quick summary, and I go more into analysis and the rest, and spoilers abound. So yeah, what I do is I go into the volume chapters and drama, and analysis as well on a little bit of drama. Very minor spoilers, but that might not be something you want to hear. So I might split the video here. Now going on to some analysis and spoilers on the drama tag. Very minor, extremely minor, of course. I don't think it'll impact your reading, but if you're sensitive about that thing. One note on the level of drama. It's been toned down by one of the organizations in China, which some people would call the Chinese Censorship Committee. The Chinese Literature Regulation Committee, one of those fancy Chinese naming systems that they used in like Soviet Russia and even now. I don't like to talk much about it just because I don't like deriding people, organizations, and it's one of those organizations. It's one of those organizations, and it's one of those organizations that if you mention their name, you get on their radar. Especially if you do a Google search, right? It's like, why are you searching this term? Why do you need to know this, right? Need to know basis. And just to get any curious parties in trouble, I do put some interesting links in the Google document below. Give me one quick second. I do put a lot of those information in the Google documents below, like the CIA, FBI, but some acronyms that you could search up, equally search up to get yourself in trouble, just like I did, and they might put you on a list, would be international and US, mostly sticking to US though. International might be like Interpol, MI5, MI6, GSG, CSGO terms and whatnot, or Rainbow Six Siege. But US ones would be the CIA, FBI, NSA, the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, AEC. Those ones I'm kind of really scared of, or at least it was interesting. FCC, the Federal Communications, FTC, Federal Trade, IRS. Just a little bit more. DOJ, DOD, NGIS. That's an interesting one. Navy Intelligence and SIGINT. As I said before, if you want to see more, I put a lot in the credits documents, and you can search it to learn more. And a whole slew of other government acronyms. Like EU has their own Interpol, I think. But yeah, because all of these novels are on a Chidian platform, and they're all in China, right? They are regulated. And I think they're covered under the China state-run General Administration of Press and Publication. I'm pulling a lot of this information from Wikipedia, by the way. And I think the Chinese title is 新闻出版总署新闻出版总署. I think that's right. And just a really quick breakdown what I guess it is. 新闻 is definitely news. 出版 is probably what they're releasing. 总 is type, and then 署 is probably the organization, or probably organization. I'm looking at organization. And they do have an internet section as well, but that's the paper and literature, press and publication. So I guess that'd be the organization they'd be covered under. But they are also covered under. There's also an separate internet censorship as well, or regulation committee. And that would be the. Sorry, give me one quick second. That would be the Cyberspace Administration Security of China. And there's a couple of other ones as well, but I know Xi Jinping ran, reading from Wikipedia, Xi Jinping ran a couple of campaigns in 2013, and they've really cleaned up the online publishing industry in China. One of the terms that people would call it would be the Great Firewall, because, China's good at building walls. And, one wall they built is the internet. And so one of the works that got caught in the crossfire, quite a famous novel and example, is Iris, which stands for I Really Am a Superstar. Really big work. A lot of Western influences. I think the author's name, I don't know the pronunciation, but I'm going to give my best guess. It's Tang Yu, which the English translation has been tasty. And there's a cool CK Talon photos and whatnot in the credits document, and probably on screen. But the Chinese idiom goes, you kill the chicken to scare the monkey, right? Or in English, it would be made an example of, right? So Iris, this novel was made an example of just for some of the questionable things they found in the book. A lot of the romantic intimacy and interactions, no drug use, but they really want to differentiate themselves from Hollywood, where they commercialize, and, capitalism, they commercialize, sometimes drug use, cigarettes, and I think cigarettes is okay, though. Drinking, alcoholism, drug abuse, they don't really encourage that. And then romantic interactions and intimacy, right? They try and regulate that a little bit more. And ever since they shut down Tang Yu and his I Really Am a Superstar, the whole scene became more tame. People weren't, I don't want to say we're not afraid to step out of line, because people still do. But it's more the fact that, they kind of knew that there were some things that they weren't supposed to write, is the best way to put it. So in the story, the romantic interactions have been taken down a notch. So you might find in the drama scenes, the romantic scenes, the author wasn't able to write a lot of intimate scenes, a lot of romantic intimacy, and a lot of intimate actions, right? A couple come to mind. I'm not going to say whether he writes them really well or not, but I'm just going to say that there were some really great moments in general. But what this does is it really puts the focus on science fiction, and I really enjoyed reading the science fiction. That's why I stayed. That's why I kept reading this. Now you'll get to some of my analysis in the volumes. Although the science fiction is great, the drama is what really makes it so amazing to reread multiple times over, second, third, and fourth time. I've only read it twice, of course, just because it takes a lot of time. But in the story, and by the author, you can still find maybe, I think you could still find just hints of romantic interaction. In my personal opinion, of course, it could be more than what I think. But I have my own thoughts about romantic interaction in books. Again, analysis video. That's saving that for analysis video. But those romantic interactions that seem just quite innocent. And so that really concludes the drama spoiler section. Really a lot just more background information, to be honest with you. Now I'm going to move on to the volumes section, right? Volume 1 is really the introduction. I don't think it has a title. It would be Tomorrow Is Not Here, Tish, or Tomorrow Has Not Arrived, or possibly none at all, right? It's approximately 130 chapters, double the length of some of the later chapters. Definitely double to 50% the length of some of the later chapters. But this is where the author really starts his focus. He really picks up his stride later on, but he started off strong. That is what I'm going to say. So when I started reading this volume, I thought it was a bit of a slog. He really puts a lot of effort into the characters, so you either get really super invested and interested in the characters or not at all. At least in my personal opinion. My personal emotions and state at the time may not have been the best though. So as I said, I generally gave him a pass for it as I really didn't know what to expect. Decent author, been reading a while, interesting topic that he covered, a fascinating summary, and then from the way he wrote, it was just different. There was definitely some drama, and I felt that was what can make it a little difficult. And just one little side note, although I might be biased um, from being what I hesitate to call myself, which is an experienced reader or veteran, the reason why I say that is I've never read any of Jing Yong's work. He's one of the giants of Chinese web novel publishing. He was either 70s, 80s, or 90s. But he wrote things like the Proud Smiling Wanderer and like maybe I think like Wandering Condor or something. Huge novels in web novels. And I never read that. I'm not the what some might call the old guard. I'm not an old monster. But I think I've personally read my fair share of books, so I'm definitely past that newcomer novice stage. And I like to call myself, or I like to think of myself as the new generation. Yeah, so that's pretty cool. And so yeah, so my opinion may be biased in that sense, just because I have a little bit of experience. I've been reading for a while. I won't mention how long, but yeah. And so if you want more of the Chinese explanation, you can go back to either earlier in the summary, or if this is a separate video, to the summary video. Yeah, as I said, so, oh shoot. No, I think I did give a former spoiler warning. So here is even more of a formal spoiler warning. I will probably, some of the volume titles may give spoilers, and I probably do a little spoilers. But as I said, this is more of an outline, so if you're interested, this might be some direction and some context to what you're about to read. So volume 2 is called, my translation is called The Fire of the Sun. The Chinese title is 太阳之火, right? It's around 374 chapters, of which 20 of them are free, and the rest are what they call VIP, or paid for chapters. And it covers a lot of nuclear reactor technologies and some intrigue. This is where the author starts to really build up a lot of tension, a lot of characters, and he writes them quite well, in my opinion. And it's really cool to see the direction it goes to. There's a lot of content in the first two. This is the longest chapter. Half the book even, right, is focused on volume 2. And really a lot of the action scenes really start to end up near the end of volume 2 and volume 3. So if you're not excited by then, it may be time to put down the book, at the end of volume 3 at least. But a breakdown of the Chinese title, 太阳之火, because this is, analysis. 太阳 means sun. It's a conjunction word meaning sun. 太 by itself, that individual character 太, generally means large, big, something of the sort, a large amount or big, or even old, right? Or I think the term would be grand as well even, but I could be wrong. And then Yang, I've never seen Yang be an independent character. I think maybe for Sun's Ray, but just Yang is generally, I don't think, independent. It's generally always in conjunction with Tai. But Tai can be with other words, like Tai Re Tai, like extreme would be. But yeah, Taiyang, Yang is always with Tai. And so those two words in conjunction mean the word sun. Then you get to 之火, which means fire of. 之 means of, like of something, and then 火 means fire, right? So 太阳之火, if you literally translate it, to be son of fire, but with the way Chinese grammar works, it's just fire of the sun. And then you get to volume 3, which can be translated to Babel Road, but I think a better translation would be Road to Heaven. The Chinese title is 同天之路. It has 60 chapters, and it starts to focus on more of the game aspects. It goes into the background of the video game, the future, and other interesting scenes that the author really decided to include. Very fascinating stuff. Very descriptive. Very well written. Now, just a breakdown of the terms. As I said, I try to keep this less spoilers because I just want to give you guys an outline. So I'm not going to go very in depth, but I'll give a basic summary. Tongtianzilu, that's the Chinese title. Now, Tongtian generally means heaven. And how that breaks up is Tong, that individual character, means to open up, I think. And then Tian generally means sky, or it can even be used as the word heaven, right? Zi, as I mentioned, so Tongtian together, I think the machine translation from Baidu is direct access to the highest authorities. Zi, as I mentioned before, is of. And then Lu generally means road. I can even break down the characters of Lu, but I'm not going to. A little bit later then. Maybe. So then we get to volume 4. I think the best title would be Earth's Last Journey, right? Forgive me for the pronunciation of this. Two terms I don't recognize. But the Chinese title is 地球装模旅行. 地球装模旅行. Total of 80 chapters. Volume 80 chapters. Oh, okay, so volume 3 was the shortest one. Volume 4 is more the average later length of the chapters. We're really getting into the end game here. All of volume 3, volume 4, volume 5 is all VIP. So it's all VIP, which means you have to pay for them. Generally, I'm not going to mention other things, but the testimonials and the epilogue are not. But yeah, so these 80 chapters are all VIP. So just a quick summary of what happens here. This is really where the author puts in some interesting ideas into play. A lot of the foreshadowing, he throws in some cultural references that are quite great, and he talks more about how the story develops. He makes time pass by, and you see character development and some fascinating story ideas. But just a quick breakdown of the title. 地球 generally means Earth, right? How that breaks down to is Di, that Chinese character, means ground, earth, dirt, land, or place, and then Qiu is just ball. And the way that this comes out to is very similar to how English uses geo. Geo, like geocaching. Gaia would be something. And like Earth, in the way that Earth, how Earth was named, Earth in Greek. How people call geo, like there's some terms that like geo means like dirt, right? So like Earth is kind of like a dirt ball, right? Because Earth is one of the planets that wasn't named after a Greek god, like Venus, Jupiter, Mars. So yeah, Earth really symbolizes, like Earth is special, right? Not just because it's home, but the way we call it in terminology, it's very similar to dirt ball. Even colloquially, we call it the blue marble. So in Chinese, it generally means dirt ball. It could also mean ground ball, the land ball, or even like our home planet. Even one could say that's what it translates to. But the more literal translation is dirt ball. 庄末 generally means end, death, demise, finish, in the sense to end. And then mo, I think, means last, final, or terminal, as in final or incurable. And together it felt like that formed the term last, 庄末. And then 旅行, 旅 by itself generally means travel or vacation. That's generally what the term means, having to do with travel in general. And then 行 is just a conjunction word. It's a homophone for another word called bank, right? Ying. But 旅行 generally is always in conjunction with each other, and it just means to travel or journey. And altogether translates to Earth's last journey. And then the very last volume is called The Stars in the Fog City. The Chinese title is 雾都全星. 雾都全星. A total of 95 chapters. This is the last stretch. And it's one of the longer ones. He puts a little bit more effort. I didn't. I'll get into it in a little bit. So I didn't really read this chapter for various reasons. One of which is that this is a chapter that the author, so as I mentioned before, the author inserts a couple of anime, cultural references, and characters, and one of those influences ends up getting a whole volume. It's not a fan fiction, but he pretty much makes this volume a tribute to another web novel, The Lord of Mysteries, A Lord of Mysteries. And that's one of a couple reasons why I skipped this volume. And I'm going to be honest here. I didn't read this volume, so I didn't read the full story. One of it's because I was kind of tired. I wasn't interested with the way the author was writing, and I don't think I could have made it through volume 5 because I felt like I got most of the good parts between 1 through 4. I got most of the content. However, there might have been some important and great scenes that I missed out on, and information that would have been cool to read. But I felt because I didn't read Lord of Mysteries, I wouldn't be able to get into it. One is I couldn't get into the Lord of Mysteries itself, and two is I wouldn't be able to get into this story, this volume as well. Because I felt that even if I did read it, a lot of references would have gone over my head, and I just would have missed out. So yeah, that's really cool. So a quick analysis on the title, or just a breakdown. Originally, I thought Wudu was an inseparable term, but looking back, it's not. Wu generally means fog, right? So, or even mist. Although I'm pretty sure they have a different term. From what I've been informed from a couple friends I talked to, Wu is the distinctive term for fog and mist, but I'm not 100% sure. It's generally used in the term hai wu. I think there's a term called hai wu, which is sea fog. And then du, that's not the way usually people read it and it's written, but in this context, it's du. What that means is city, capital, metropolis. And it can mean in a grammatical term is entirely, which is duo, but because it's pronounced du, it means city, capital, metropolis. And an example would be a city called Chengdu, right? And so that's a city in China that uses the term du. So wudu means fog. And then you have quan, quanxing, that means galaxy or various stars. Now, quan, I'm pretty sure is a measure word for a group of, or like a group of, in the following term, stars. Although I originally thought it was qing, like for a group of people, but it doesn't sound right, so I'm pretty sure it's just quan. And then xing just means stars, so altogether translates to 雾度全星 is the stars in the Fog City, and Fog City is I think one of the an important place in Lord of Mysteries. And then finally, there is the epilogue. It totals around 7 chapters, and this is the home stretch. He ended it really well, I thought. So in the author testimonials, or in one of his final thoughts chapters, he wrote that he could have written more. I personally think that he wanted to end with the 8th chapter, or reserve the 8th chapter for some of his thoughts on his book, his thanks to various patrons and readers, his editor, and like it's just his wrap up. It's his wrap up chapter where he gets to write about what he thought about the story. Yeah, so basically his concluding thoughts and anything else he wanted to add on. And I think the reason why he did that is because, in Chinese, 8 or ba, or I think it's ba ba in Chinese means generally has a connotation of money, right? And that's my guess and analysis on why he chose to end on the 8th chapter. And I definitely would have loved to read more, but he ended it in a good place. He brought a lot of closure to the stories, to the characters, to a lot of the storylines. And I thought that was a really good place to end. And with that note, it really wraps up my summary of Tomorrow Has Not Arrived, 明日未临. And just a very quick PS or postscript.